The place is Franklin County, Virginia, in the year 1856. A small boy who will go on to change the future of African Americans everywhere has just been born, and sadly, he is born a slave. Around the age of 10, he will be emancipated just as the American Civil War draws to a close. The boy's name is Booker T. Washington, and he is going to do extraordinary things. In his drive to educate himself, Washington walks to Hampton Institute. There, he will study industrial education and serve as an assisting teacher for 2 years. As Washington furthers his education, he comes to believe that the only way for black lives to prosper is through education and economic standing. Washington firmly believed that in order for African Americans to succeed, they must make themselves indispensable to society and hold jobs such as farmers, shoemakers, and agricultures to ensure that blacks would soon find their way into the everyday economy. Contrary to what other civil rights activists pushed for, Washington declared that African Americans must stop the push for voting rights and total equality and should instead focus on first owning and land and working. Because he pushed for education among blacks, Washington only advanced his work in the education field by founding Tuskegee Normal and Agriculture Institute in 1881. At Tuskegee, he was able to create adult and extension education that not only helped adult former slaves, but also brought education straight to people's doorsteps. Through the extension program, Washington was able to deliver education to farmers' houses and make them more self-sufficient and productive contributors to society. Washington pushed for more practical working skills as opposed to liberal arts education, and promised that these skills would help blacks earn the tools to own land and business. Washington believed that once African Americans learned these skills, whites would accept them into everyday life. Because of these views, Washington was more popular among Southern whites and blacks as it decreased violence among blacks and backed away from the idea of suffrage. Overall, Washington's beliefs that African Americans needed to own land and business before they tried to vote soon gave him popularity among whites and blacks across the nation. On the opposite end of the civil rights spectrum sits a man, W.e.b. Du Bois. Born a free man in Great Barrington, Massachusetts in 1868, Du Bois had the privilege of a higher education. At the age of 17, he attended Fisk University as an undergraduate student. After his attendance at Fisk, Du Bois went on to study at Harvard and became the first African American to receive a doctorate from the Ivy League school. Even after his education at Harvard, Du Bois studied at the University of Berlin. During his education, Du Bois took classes such as Latin, English, Greek, physics, and chemistry. W.e.b. Du Bois then went on to teach at the social conditions of colored people in sociology at Wilberforce University, University of Pennsylvania, and Atlanta University. And contrary to Washington, Du Bois strongly believes that full equality in education, civil advancement, and especially suffrage were extremely important to help black lives. Viewed as Washington's more radical counterpart, Du Bois participates in different pro-black movements such as the Niagara Movement and the NAACP, which he helped create. He also believes in the talented tenth, or the small fraction of educated blacks, to guide the masses towards full equality and suffrage rights. His views are easily accepted by Northern freemen because of his relentless push towards not only economic status and education like Washington, but also towards complete equality through suffrage and civil rights. Like Washington, Du Bois also affects Southern slaves by pushing for practical as well as liberal education for blacks. The two men soon stormed the political front with their fight to achieve equality. Washington argued that African Americans needed to show their usefulness through economic placement, while Du Bois contested that it would be impossible for blacks to own land and business without rights or suffrage. Du Bois even thought that Washington's views supported segregation and that Washington wanted limited opportunities for African Americans. Washington's views were seen as more conservative, whereas Du Bois was viewed as a radical activist. Despite their opposing views, the two men greatly respected each other and both contributed to the bettering of African American life. To this day, both Washington and Du Bois's views can be found in discussion over how to end racial and class discrimination.